And we can now speak to James Denselow. He's the head of conflict and humanitarian policy at Save the Children UK. He joins us from London. Good to see you. Now, the UN says Gaza has become a graveyard for children. Just how serious is their plight?
Well, it doesn't get much more serious than the numbers we've seen of children killed, of children injured, of children forced from their homes, of children in desperate need of food and water, of children who've had their daily routine completely turned on its head in Gaza, their education completely paused, for instance. But the most dramatic images are of the children who have lost their lives. It's worth always reminding ourselves that children have a different physiology to adults. They're not just little adults. They have less blood to lose, they have thinner skin, more brittle bones, and of course the kind of warfare that we're seeing in Gaza today is extremely deadly for them.
Mm-hmm. Now, what about your colleagues in Gaza? I mean, it's in your name. You want to save the children, but are they even able to provide any help at this point?
Well, our staff in Gaza and our thoughts are always with them. And unfortunately, with the power cuts and various internet outages, often we can't be in touch with all of them all the time as we'd like. But they're having to look after and save their own children, first and foremost. And of course, the vast majority of our team, like the majority now of the population of the Gaza Strip, have been forced from their homes by the events of the last 3 weeks. So it is the most dangerous place in the world to be an aid worker today. There have been dozens of aid workers killed in the last few weeks, and it makes it impossible to do the amount of humanitarian programming that we need to do. If you consider that the population was 80% dependent on humanitarian aid before the events that we've seen unfold.
Yeah. Now, some humanitarian aid has been getting through the Rafah border crossing. Are you at all hopeful that this will increase in the days to come?
Well, we have to have hope, but we also have to remember that there was an average of around 500 trucks a day going into Gaza before this conflict broke out, and that number is now some just over 200 in the space of 3 weeks. So there's a huge backlog. The needs are far higher, and the numbers of trucks that we need to go in need to rise exponentially. But in addition to that, you need all the water turned back on, you need electricity turned back on so the desalination plants can operate, you need fuel for the power plants, but most critically, you need some form of humanitarian ceasefire so that children in Gaza can be reached.
A ceasefire that the Israeli government says at this point is off the table. That was James Denselow from Save the Children. All the best to your colleagues. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Wounded Palestinians and foreign passport holders have been allowed to leave Gaza for the first time today. Officials say several hundred have entered Egypt through the Rafah border crossing. We just heard about it. They are the first to benefit from an agreement brokered by Qatar. Among those allowed across are German citizens working for international aid agencies.
People in Gaza have waited for weeks for this gate to open towards Egypt. And now it has. Within an hour, these ambulances were rushing through. According to the UN, thousands of civilians have been injured in Gaza since Israel began its war on terror group Hamas. Many of them, critically wounded, are in urgent need of medical care. Egyptian authorities say 81 Gazans were allowed to go across based on a deal struck between Egypt, Israel, and Hamas, and mediated by Qatar. On the other side, Egypt has set up a field hospital to treat injured Palestinians, and thousands of doctors have registered to help. At the same time, volunteers in Egypt are trying to get more aid into Gaza. Today, 60 trucks have passed. Yesterday, another 60. The priority is for medicine to pass. We've seen children undergoing surgeries without anesthesia. These border crossings take time as vehicles and documents are checked to ensure safety. That adds to people's anxiety to get across, for no one knows how long the Rafah crossing will remain open. For those standing in Gaza, it's the only way out of war.
Our correspondent Rebecca Ritters joins us now from Ashkelon in southern Israel. Rebecca, long-awaited relief, at least for some people. What more can you tell us about efforts to evacuate people through the Rafah crossing?
Well, Nicole, as you've been reporting, today was the first day that the border has actually been open and people have been able to cross. We started getting word about this maybe last night, that things might be moving along this morning. We saw a list of up to between 400 and 500 people, foreign nationals largely, and some Palestinians who work for foreign or for NGO organisations. Now we have seen that come to fruition. A few fewer than we thought. We're seeing more than 320 people, foreign nationals and NGO workers, have managed to cross over, as well as just a little over 80 severely injured and sick people as well to receive some medical help in Egypt. So it's been a huge sigh of relief, obviously, and hopefully it is thought that this will kickstart more people being able to cross. We believe there's about 7,000 people on these dual national lists, and also other Palestinians working for foreign NGOs or NGO workers who have been put on these lists. Now, we know that the US, the UK, Germany, for example, they weren't on the list today, so we should be seeing more come. We did hear today that German nationals were told also to start heading towards Rafah crossing, and we know that tomorrow it's thought that the crossing will be open again, and more people will be allowed through. So it's a huge sigh of relief, but of course, many people still trapped inside with continual bombardment.
Yeah, U.S. President Joe Biden has also announced that U.S. citizens will be able to leave Gaza soon. Now, what do we know about the fighting in Gaza? The Israeli military says more soldiers have been killed there.
Yeah, just in the last little while, actually, the number of dead soldiers that the IDF has announced has risen to 16 soldiers. This is coming out slowly. The families need to be notified before they can make an official announcement. We're seeing also some videos, some obviously unverified videos on Hamas channels that looks like it could in fact be a greater number, but we won't know that, of course, until the coming days when official numbers do come out. But obviously it just indicates how difficult this ground invasion is for the soldiers on the ground. We're talking about tight spaces. They're expanding this ground invasion, and they're coming up. They're meeting some substantial resistance, even though the Israeli military is saying that they have now broken the Hamas line, that they are making successes, but they are paying a great cost, though Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister, is saying that they would be continuing, they would be expanding, that this will be a long war, and it will be a difficult one for Israelis, but one that is worth fighting.
DW correspondent Rebecca Ritters, always great speaking to you. Thank you so much. And I'm now joined by Daniel Gerlach. He's a Middle East analyst and editor-in-chief of Zenith magazine, which focuses on the Arab and Muslim world. He joins us tonight from Alexandria in Egypt. Welcome back to DW. Now, Daniel, Egypt has opened its border for foreign passport holders and some critically injured Palestinians for the very first time. What can you tell us about the agreement and how it came about?
Well, it seems that was quite a nerve-wracking negotiation because, of course, the people that are involved in the Egyptian side here are the security officials, the intelligence officials, the ones that are really caring, like have a very military and very security-oriented look on the situation. On the other side, you have the Qataris who are talking to Hamas and Hamas's allies, trying to negotiate the liberation of civilian hostages at the same time. And then you have the Americans who play a very important role behind the screens because Antony Blinken is talking to the Qataris, to the Egyptians, and to the Israelis at the same time. So I think these are really moments for classic diplomacy and not for great announcement and words in public, because whatever you say, what you might, marginalize or anger one of the sides involved, and all the goodwill of all sides is very important here. So I can imagine that these negotiations were tough and they're not really clear. When we talk about the number of people that are allowed into Egypt for treatment, it's not really clear if it's about the Qataris are pushing for 500 per day. Then it wasn't sure, when would they have to return to Gaza? So all of this is not really agreed upon as far as I know. At least it is not public, and I don't have the sources on that.
Yeah, many unknowns still at this point. But Qatar, that seems for sure, has been instrumental in bringing this evacuation about. What leverage does Doha have over Hamas?
Well, Qatar has a lot of leverage over Hamas because Hamas depends on the Qatari mediation efforts. Let's not forget that the political leadership of Hamas, which is not the same as the military on the ground, I think there is a big gap between the political leadership, which is also exiled and based in Doha, and the people on the ground in Gaza. But of course, Qatar has leverage on them because they could simply kick them out and hand them over to whoever they wanted. So that is leverage that the Qataris have. On the other side, let's make no mistake, the Qataris are a small negotiation team, and as far as I know, they're really working day and night. But they need also something to give to the other side from the Israelis. And that has been a big issue because, of course, Benjamin Netanyahu is under intense pressure and he wants this military campaign to go full into the Gaza Strip. And civilian casualties are not, or avoiding civilian casualties seems not to be the first priority. And they're taking the risk. And, of course, the Americans are really depending on the Qataris at the same time. So it's a very interesting, let's say, network of actors here. And of course, the Europeans can play a role, but I don't think the Europeans or the Germans are playing the key role here.
Mm-hmm. Now, Qatar has supported Hamas politically, you mentioned it there, and financially over many years. They have blamed Israel squarely for the October 7th massacre. So how come Israel is accepting them as a mediator?
Look, Israel and Qatar have a long-standing intelligence, I wouldn't say cooperation, but communication. All the money that the Qataris have provided for humanitarian aid, also for the, let's say, maintenance of the administration in Gaza, was transferred, of course, in coordination and agreement with the Israelis. That's what the Qataris have always said, and Israel has never denied it. It's also quite interesting that we hear a lot of criticism against Qatar in Germany, in other European countries. I have frankly not heard that from the Israeli side. The Mossad director, David Barnea, went to Doha, according to the sources that I've talked to, last Sunday, I believe, to discuss the hostages situation. And the Israelis are really, really depending on the Qataris because they are at the moment the only ones who could probably talk to Hamas and negotiate at least the liberation of the civilians. So the Israelis know what they have there, and it's quite a paradoxical situation, of course, that they strongly disagree on political issues, but they're in a way bound to cooperate. And I don't think the Qataris are doing this to do a favor to the Israelis. They're doing this because they want to establish themselves as a mediation power, and foremost because they would like to do the Americans a favor and support the Americans because they know that the Americans would also support them.
That was Middle East analyst Daniel Gerlach in Alexandria. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Let's bring in Anchal Vohra. She's a foreign affairs columnist at Foreign Policy magazine and joins us now from Tel Aviv. Welcome to the day. First of all, Anchal, people have been let out of Gaza for the very first time since October 7th. U.S. President Joe Biden says American citizens will leave Gaza today. Is this a one-off, or are we looking at some true relief for the civilians in Gaza?
Well, it's limited relief, and it's unclear whether it's a one-off or not. From what we've picked up so far, that there will be limited openings for limited time periods, which means that this may happen again, but the number of people to benefit will remain rather small if you look at the overall population of Gaza that is stuck, as Israel continues its operation there. So it is a relief, certainly, but how many times will the border open, for how long, and how many people would be able to get out is unclear, and it's expected thus far to remain a small affair.
Now, Qatar has been positioning itself as a key player in the negotiations between Egypt, between Hamas and Israel. How key have they been in securing this development specifically?
Well, this development, not so keen, I would say. I think there are three strands to the negotiations that are going on or in future are expected to happen. One is, and most important, is for the people of Gaza to get basic aid. That is happening between Israel and Egypt and Hamas, because Egypt is the only country that Gaza has a border crossing, an opening with. The other is hostages. This is perhaps, from Israeli perspective, the most crucial. That's the one that Qatar is leading. So in this specific one, I don't think Qataris have played any role, if you'd ask me. And the third is the long-term talks and or a ceasefire, and talk of an enduring ceasefire. There, perhaps Qatar could play a role. It certainly wants to, but even there, we'd see Egypt is a competitor.
I want to keep looking at the role of Qatar here, though, because it is a very interesting player. It is extremely close to Hamas. It's giving their political branch a basis. They're funding them in part. They have, in fact, exclusively blamed Israel for the massacres on October 7th. So to what extent is Israel really willing to work with them here?
Well, just to clarify, Qatar is playing a very, very important role and has huge amounts of leverage over Hamas. Now, whether it is exercising that leverage or not, we are not very clear, because thus far only 4 hostages have been released. There are at least 240 hostages, the last number that we're aware of. So Qatar has huge influence over Hamas. Israelis have asked Qatar to use it. Is it using it? You've got Hamas's office there, which means Hamas's leadership is there in Doha, in that office in Doha. They're not just sitting and having cups of tea, but they're actually meeting with their Iranian patrons. They're meeting with all sorts of their allies. They're planning things. Qatar could use its influence. It is hosting the Hamas's office. It sends millions in aid to Gaza every year. This money goes through Israel, and Israel knows where it is going, but it is going to Gaza to support the people of Gaza. But the Israelis have long suspected, and others have said, that a part of this money goes to Hamas, or at least sustains Hamas's government or governance, its bureaucracy there. So Qatar has huge influence. Thus far, it says it is trying to get the hostages released, but only 4 hostages have been released. It is kind of right now, I think, from what I've gathered, playing the role of, it's passing messages. It's saying Israel needs to stop bombing Gaza so Hamas can gather all the hostages and then send at least the civilians back to Israel. And because Israel isn't stopping the bombing, the transfer of or the hostages are not being released. So that's, I think all it's really doing is sort of conveying what Hamas wants to Israel and what Israel wants to Hamas, but it perhaps can play a bigger role.
Mm-hmm. Do you think a release of all civilians that Hamas is currently holding is in the cards?
It is, from what I've picked up. I've been talking to an official who's aware of negotiations, ongoing negotiations, and yes, civilians could be released by Hamas if Israel stops or agrees to a ceasefire, which has not happened thus far, although there's talk that there might be pauses, humanitarian pauses, remains to be seen. But the message that we're getting from Doha is that Hamas has agreed to at least return civilian hostages, but not armed Israelis. And in exchange for armed Israelis, it wants its own Palestinian prisoners, all of them, released.
So just to be clear, you're saying that Qatar is a major player, Egypt as well. Qatar wants to come out on top. Of course, what's in it for them, though?
Well, they want to be big players in global geopolitics. This is one of the richest countries in the world with one of the highest per capita incomes and 3rd largest gas reserves. They've hosted the soccer World Cup and other sporting tournaments, and they were in limelight again when Europe cut off Russian gas supplies after Russia's Ukraine invasion, and Qatar has a lot of gas. So they want to play, they want to be prominent, and they're surrounded by bigger, much more influential, much more prominent neighbors, and they kind of feel that they might be undermined. Their authority, the authority of this small kingdom, small but very wealthy kingdom, might be undermined, and they want to secure their place. And just to be clear, I'd like to clarify one thing here. Egypt has a different role to play. Qataris are essentially looking at hostage negotiations, whereas Egypt, from what I've picked up, plays a bigger role when it comes to an enduring ceasefire or when it comes to the passing of aid. So these are two different negotiations.
Fascinating insights. That was Anchal Vohra of the Foreign Policy magazine joining us from Tel Aviv. Thanks for your time.